Hey everyone, for this video we are going to do something a little bit different. Instead of showing a specific location, I will look at a whole neighborhood, Forest Hills in Queens. Now again, I am not a tour guide nor am I an expert in the history of New York City, but it is one of my favorite neighborhoods to walk through, and in fact it's a place I have been to many times. So I figured I will show you some stuff that I do know or have seen at least, and at the same time I figured it could be a little bit of like a therapeutic video for me, in that I am in one of the busiest weeks of the semester with the finals, grading, projects and so on. So I figured walking around for like 2 hours will give me some time to relax, and honestly very badly needed exercise away from the desk and the chair. And so that was the plan. Unfortunately, those 2 hours turned into 5.5 hours of just simply walking around, which then led to basically a sleepless night, as I had to make up those hours in the evening to catch up with all the work. But you know what? I have to show my dedication to this channel once in a while, right? Anyway, as you see, it is a gorgeous neighborhood with lots of these Tudor homes, which is a style I really like because it gives the house some charm and coziness, I think. But as you see, generally these streets are private, which means do not plan on parking your car here if you do not have a permit. And if you are not willing to spend somewhere between $1 and $4 million on a house, it's probably a neighborhood you do not want to put too much hope into, as it's not just the home itself you need to consider and the mortgage for it, but then also the high cost of living, as on private streets, the residents need to pay for the maintenance of those streets themselves, for instance. Therefore, owning a home like this could be a little bit more expensive than an average house in New York City. Many times people talk about Forest Hills as a suburb in a city, because as you see here, for instance, it is. Really walking through the streets, you feel far away from the city, and yet if you walk up just few streets, the city is right there hitting you like a runaway train. Yet here, you are removed from the action and the stress of all of that. And in fact, this section was specifically designed to do that from the very beginning, and it is referred to as the Forest Hills Gardens, which makes up a big portion of the neighborhood itself. In the early 1900s, this area was still really like a village with farmland all around it. In fact, a lot of the land was owned by a German immigrant, Askan Bacchus, known as the King Farmer. Eventually, his son, Frederick, along with Cord Meyer, began developing this area, renaming it from White Pot to Forest Hills. Shortly afterwards, in 1909, Margaret Sage, right after the death of her husband Russell Sage, bought land and developed it into what we see today. It was to be an area far removed from the polluted, loud and dirty scene of the city, filled with industry and crowded streets. In fact, on Queens Boulevard, there is a TD Bank building which has a beautiful mosaic mural depicting what the vibe of the neighborhood is all about. Here you see in the front the Forest Hills Gardens with beautiful Tudor buildings surrounded by trees and nature. All the way in the front is also the Square Station with the Long Island Railroad stop and the Forest Hills Stadium to the right, all of which I will show you in a moment. And there in the background you see the city giving off like this vibe of industry and development and not really nature itself. But in the middle, you see like 2 cylinders. These were gas holders, which were demolished in 2001. But certainly I still remember them from my childhood, as I drove past them on numerous occasions in the back of my parents' car. And something I would like to show you more of in the future. But there, all the way in the back, you see the Twin Towers and Manhattan. And here we have the Square Station. The architect of the buildings was Grosvenor Atterbury, and the landscape design was done by Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., whose father passed away about 10 years earlier, but is remembered for such projects as the Central Park. In fact, on Asken Avenue, under the train overpass, there is a mural dedicated to some of the people who are part of this whole story I just mentioned. We have Russell Sage, his wife Margaret Sage, who bought the land, Askham Bacchus, as you see with the nickname the King Farmer, Grosvenor Atterbury, principal architect, and Frederick Olmsted Jr., the landscape architect. So now, if you ever walk down the street and you see the mural, maybe some of these names will now have some sort of a meaning. But back to the square station, which is really the centerpiece, the gateway, you can say, to the Forest Hills Gardens themselves. And honestly, an enjoyable place to really just hang out. It was built in 1912-1913, and it used to be the Forest Hill Inn. However, in the late 1960s, it was converted to apartments. But when you look closely, the details are really stunning, like even the light posts. But not just here on the square station, but throughout the neighborhood. The street lights, even the street signs are really unique and beautiful, and I just wish this attention to detail was given to more places around the city. Here is the actual Forest Hill station of the Long Island Railroad, which you can take to Manhattan, like Grand Central Station, or you can go the other way out onto Long Island. But if you live in New York City or you're going to visit, I highly recommend walking through a neighborhood like this to really see the diversity of the city and some of the unique sections of it. Right by the square station, we have one of the main streets, Austin Street, which is pretty cozy, but at the same time packed with local stores and great food. But I used to come here a lot because right here in this location, you see Target. But before Target moved in, this used to be Barnes & Noble's bookstore. And when I was a graduate in school, this is where I always came to get my books. At least once every 2 weeks or so, I would stop by here to look at the clearance section and usually pick up a book. So it was a bit painful to see the bookstore finally close. About 2 streets away, we have the Forest Hills Stadium, a place I would love to possibly do a longer video on in the future. It is the site of the West Side Tennis Club, and in fact the stadium was built in 1923 for tennis matches, hosting the US Open tennis tournament until it was moved in 1978 to its current location in Corona Park. But aside from its rich tennis history, it also served as an important music venue in the 60s and 70s and really all the way until today. You had some of the biggest names perform here, like Simon and Garfunkel, the Beatles, Frank Sinatra, the Bee Gees. So those of you who are even younger than me, definitely look up some of these names, great music, and of course, many others. Honestly, again, all the way until today. Actually, before I put this video together, I looked up the events that were planned for this year, and you will have musicians like Shawn Mendes, for instance, and comedian Louis C.K. So it's still a vibrant place. And, well, here is actually an issue. I know that many of the neighbors around the stadium actually have a problem with all these performances and noise. Here is the stadium, and here are the homes, literally across the street. So I know there are many noise complaints and lawsuits by the neighbors, and I am sure it is just an overall tough situation where you would listen to both sides and they would both have a good point. From the stadium itself and them continuing a long tradition of entertainment, bringing in income to maintain the stadium, to probably the argument of helping local businesses on concert nights. But I would definitely understand the neighbors. Think about a situation where someone has small kids and they need to put them to bed and they can't because of the noise. I am sure that once in a while you can just kind of suck it up, right? But too often, I am sure that any tired parent, after changing poop diapers all day long and listening to their own concert of babies screaming heavy metal sounds throughout the day, will have a meltdown around 11 p.m. if they cannot put their kids to bed. So I am sure it is just a tough situation for both parties here. But speaking about music, Forest Hills is also a very important place for that as well. Well, first off, it's a location of some famous movie scenes. For instance, the first Spiderman movie from 2002, when Spiderman was played by Tobey Maguire. Here is his home from the movie, and Mary Jane's house is right next to it. Wow, I can't believe that's 23 years ago now since the movie came out. Wow. But that is one thing that sort of depresses me in the classroom, I'll be honest with you as a professor. I sometimes give references to these great movies I grew up with, like Saving Private Ryan, The Gladiator, The Pianist, and I am met with complete blank stares, like if I am listing the names of ancient battles. Sometimes I just don't know if I should curl into a ball and cry in the corner of the room, or go the other way and fight my way through it and expose my students to a lot of great things that they are missing out on. But aside from movie locations, we also have music. For instance, this is the place of the Ramones. They were a punk rock group who popularized the genre, really. Punk rock was really a movement against establishment, you can say, of like mainstream rock. You know, the idea was that rock music used to be rebellious and wild, and then by the 1970s it kind of became more mild, domesticated, you can say. Hence, punk rock challenged that to some degree. Now, I was not around yet in the 70s, but growing up, I did listen to many groups that were influenced by punk rock. Although probably it was more like pop rock, groups like Blink-182, Jimmy Eat World, My Chemical Romance, Green Day. In fact, I really enjoy all genres of music, to be honest. It all really sort of depends on the time of the day. For instance, when I wake up in the morning, like 6 o'clock in the morning, you can definitely find me drinking coffee, reading a newspaper, and listening to like classical music, Beethoven or Tchaikovsky. But then as the day progresses, my tempo really begins to speed up, to the point that about 11 p.m., when most people are either sleeping or at least tuning themselves out, I am putting in my best work, blasting away, like really heavy rock, like Evanescence, which is kind of approaching hard rock, metal sounds. Hence, I'm really like a very early morning person and a night person as well. But slowly, my body is trying to tell me, dude, you are not 18, stop it, or you are not going to bend that knee tomorrow, nor put a intelligent sentence together. You know what? Maybe that is why I like listening to rock in the evening. I too like to rebel against the norm. But there's also one more place dedicated to the Ramones, and it is this street sign right in front of the Forest Hills High School. So here's the thing, my first 2 years in college, I was a pre-med student. Then my junior year, I switched over to history and I moved on to my master's degree in history. However, I remember my dad was always putting a little bit of pressure on me that with history, I'm not really going to have a good future or have a good job. And so even though I was not really doing bad because I was doing my graduate work and at the same time, I was already working part-time in Baruch College. But nevertheless, I kind of began doubting myself a little bit in the back of my mind. You always have these questions, what if? And so while doing my classes to complete my graduate degree in history, I also began taking classes in education. Have a backup plan so that worst case scenario, I could teach in a New York City public high school. And so for about a year, I was doing both programs at the same time. But doing the master's in education included doing observation hours in schools throughout New York City. And this high school right here is one of those places I did few hours of observation. So even though I never went to the school, I still kind of remember the school on the inside. I remember that after doubting myself for about a year, trying to do all these things at the same time, I then got accepted to a doctorate program at St. John's University, and at the same time, I got lucky enough to have a fellowship. And so I was back in business, full throttle in history, and I stopped my master's in education, never completing it. So that was a fun chapter in my life. But alright, I hope you enjoyed this video and I was able to provide some interesting information, not just about the neighborhood, but also a little bit more about myself. So I hope you have a great week. I will see you soon and stay safe out there. Bye.